So you've decided to grow your first garden. What could be more exciting? But even as I hear myself say those words, I realize that for some, that can be a daunting thought. Where to start? When to start? What to grow? And how to grow it? So many questions. And even after a rudimentary search, it seems like there's even more answers. Confusing to say the least, especially if you're just starting out. But once you get into it, really get your hands in the dirt and buy into the idea of growing your own food, you'll quickly see that it's not nearly as difficult as it seems. Sure, there's going to be setbacks, even for the most veteran grower. But the bounty you receive will outweigh the disappointment 100-fold. And while for many of us, the weather looks a lot like this outside, making gardening seem like a far-off venture. But in reality, growing a successful garden is all about planning ahead. So it may not seem like it because of the weather outside, but the beginning of a new year is actually the perfect time to think about starting that first garden. Seasoned growers are already starting their seeds indoors and prepping the beds that aren't under a foot of snow. But don't worry, the days are early and we'll get there. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and in this 4-part beginner gardening series, we'll go over everything that you need to know to make your first garden a successful one. Soil, nutrients, pH, watering, location, plant selection, all of it. And it starts right now. Hey, before we get into the plants and even the seeds themselves, it would make sense to create a baseline of knowledge to help us get started. Take away some of that mystery of growing a garden for the first time to give us the best chance at initial success. And we can do this by covering the 3 T's of gardening: terms, tools, and timing. Let's look at some common gardening terms to make sure that we can speak the language. Aeration describes the methods used to loosen soil and create air gaps necessary for plant roots. Allium, a group of common crops including garlic, green onions, and scallions. Amendments, nutrient or functional additions to the soil to improve its structure and/or fertility. Annual, a group of plants who complete their entire life cycle within a year. Axil, the angle between the upper side of a leaf or side stem and the main vertical trunk. Beneficial insects. Insects that help your garden in 2 ways. 1, they act as pollinators for our flowering plants. And 2, they prey upon the bad insects that are harmful or damage our crops. Biennial. A group of plants who complete their entire life cycle within 2 years with vegetative growth in the first and flowering in the second. Cation exchange capacity. It's the direct measure of how many nutrients your soil can hold onto over time, with clay soils being the highest and sandy soils being the least. Chlorosis. Yellowing of the leaves and stems, usually due to a lack of nutrition. Companion planting. The practice of growing different crops in close proximity for their mutual benefit. Compost. The decomposing plant and kitchen waste used to enrich the top layers of our soil after it's been broken down. Container gardening, a style of growing exclusively in pots and containers, usually on a patio or deck, in the absence of arable land. Cover crops, quick growing plants used to combat erosion and bare soil, usually during the dormant seasons. Crop rotation, the practice of planting and growing different crops in a specified area to optimize nutrients and prevent pest and weed buildup. Damping off, a disease caused by pathogens and funguses that affects seedlings soon after they germinate. This causes stem and root rot and eventually death. Direct seeding, method of planting whereby the seeds are planted directly into your garden or raised bed rather than germinated indoors and then transplanted. Drainage refers to your soil's ability to shed excess water, whether it's in the ground, in a raised bed, or in a container. Exposure, the amount of sunshine an area receives in a given day denoted as full sun, partial shade, or full shade. Fertilizer. Any material, natural or synthetic, that provides essential elements, compounds, and nutrients for the plants to use. Foliar feeding. A method of feeding plants through their leaves rather than the traditional method that uses their roots. Frost dates. 2 specific dates in temperate regions, noting the last day of frost in the spring and the first day of frost in the fall. Germination. The sprouting of a plant for the first time from a dormant seed. Hardening off. The process of acclimating indoor plants to the infinitely harsher conditions of outside regarding temperature, wind, and exposure. Hardiness zone. Geographic areas categorized by their minimum annual winter temperatures. Micronutrients. Elements and minerals needed by plants in small amounts to complete their life functions and to stay healthy. Mulch. A layer of material, usually organic, applied to the surface of the soil to protect it from water loss, exposure, temperature extremes, and to suppress weeds. Nodes. Area on a stem or trunk of a plant where the leaf or a side branch appear. The areas between the nodes are called internodes. No-till. A style of farming where the soil is left alone and rarely disturbed other than to harvest. Preservation of the soil integrity is the ultimate goal. NPK. An acronym for the 3 main macronutrients plants need to live: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Perennial. A group of plants whose life cycle takes 3 or more years to complete. Pests. Invasive animals who eat and damage crops when their numbers aren't kept in check. They can be native or non-native. pH. A measuring scale of the relative acidity or alkalinity in the soil, with neutral being a 7. Anything below being acidic, and anything above being alkaline. Pruning. A method of cutting back plants to either clean them up or control excess growth. Rhizome. Horizontal underground plant stems capable of producing roots or shoots to establish brand new plants. Root bound. Condition of a plant, usually in a container, where the roots have taken over every inch of space and they can't go anywhere else. Root rot. Condition affecting the roots of a plant either by being too wet with too little oxygen or by pathogens and disease. Runner. Long stem-like growths protruding from a mother plant that once established can break away from the main plant, growing into a completely new one, such as strawberries. Soil. The lifeblood and growing medium of any farm, made of 5 ingredients: minerals, organic matter, living organisms, water, and air. Spacing. The practice of planting crops with enough space between each other so that they can grow properly. Minimum spacing requirements are usually what's given. Stratification. The process of pre-treating dormant seeds to simulate the natural conditions that they need in order to germinate at a high rate. Transplanting. The process of moving plants from one location to another, such as small plugs or starters, to their final home in your garden. Vernalization. The induction of flowering, bud formation, or bulb formation of a biennial or perennial plant by exposing it to a chilling period, usually winter. Weeds. Any plant species growing where it's neither intended nor wanted. Many weeds can be beneficial, however. Wet feet. A condition in plants where drainage is poor and standing water replaces air, causing the soil to go anaerobic and the plants to suffer. As exhausting as that list was, it is by no means exhaustive. If you guys can think of any terms that'll help your fellow grower, please leave it in the comments down below. All right, now that we speak the lingo, let's look at some of the essential tools that we're going to need to start growing. The truth is, we don't need anything. You can grow plants just fine without investing in any hardware at all. However, tools do make gardening life a heck of a lot easier. So here's my top 5 list of gear to get your grow on. Regardless of the size of your garden, the most efficient tool at moving dirt is a shovel of some sort. And for growing veggies in your backyard, that would be a trowel. These mini shovels make short work of any planting job by digging the perfect holes for our starter plants and moving the soil to pack them in. Sowing seeds, adding amendments, even harvesting. You name it, trowels can do it. Next up, we have our cutting tools. Just as a trowel or small scoop is to digging, a pair of hand pruners is to cutting. You're going to use these guys to prune the thick branches of fruiting plants such as raspberries, blueberries, and grapes, as well as cutting down the vigorous crops like corn and your spent peppers and tomatoes. Keep them clean and sharp, and a good set of pruners will last you your entire gardening life. Keeping up with the cutters, if you can swing it, I do like to have a finer pair of scissors. Use these guys for the more delicate jobs, such as trimming and harvesting your herbs. You can even get away with a nice sharp pair of office scissors. The plants don't mind. Gardening is dirty work sometimes, and normally I don't mind getting my hands a bit dirty. But a pair of gloves can come in handy. Especially when you're pruning some of those prickly plants, or even a little protection from the cold. A good set of gloves is never a bad idea. Lastly, one versatile tool that I have no trouble splurging on is a hard rake. Although I try not to disturb my soils too much, a hard rake to tamp down the area for level seeding, or to dig even rows for your carrots or beets, is made much easier with a hard rake. They aren't crazy expensive, and they should last you a long time. Okay, we can now talk like a gardener, and we have all the tools necessary. Time to start planting, right? Wrong. Growing plants to the point where you can harvest and eat them consistently and reliably is all about timing, especially if you live in an area with defined seasons. Planning out your crops is essential so that they're growing in the window of opportunity that they're designed to take advantage of. You can't grow peppers in the winter if your climate dips below 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. And if you have a really hot summer, you should wait for cooler days for your lettuces and kale. Every single crop has an ideal window of time to grow, and that window of time is different for every climate. You may see a ton of videos and posts online showing people planting tomatoes in January. But if you live in a climate like mine, even in the greenhouse, tomatoes can't be planted until March or April. Knowing these windows will help you prepare ahead of time and give you a clearer idea of when to plant and when you can expect to harvest. It may be cold and miserable outside, but the great thing about gardening is that there's always something to do. So brush up on your gardening terminology, look at acquiring any tools that you may need for the coming season, and start planning your planting timelines based on your climate and the crops you want to grow. All right, that covers the 3 T's of gardening basics. And in video number 2, we're going to cover the 3 S's: soil, seeds, and spacing. Should be a good one. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. I appreciate the support more than you know. And if you're getting value from these videos, please like and share them to spread the word and help your fellow gardener to grow better.